Hey, what's going on, people? Tony here with another video. Now, this is going to be a fun one because I want to talk about how I'm a huge fan of DC Comics. Now, what's crazy about this is that this wasn't always the case. I've always traditionally been a Marvel guy, right? Marvel Comics is always my jam. My first comic book was a Marvel book. Marvel's always been my thing, but in the last year and a half, ever since DC Rebirth, let's just be real here, big DC fan. Now, as a matter of fact, DC has been crushing Marvel as far as I'm concerned. So, yeah, man, let's get into it. Why do I like DC Comics so much in the modern age? All right, like I said up at the top, I've always been a Marvel guy, but that isn't to say I wasn't into DC books. I just didn't get into them as much as I did the Marvel Universe. Marvel Universe just seemed more accessible, right? DC Universe always seemed very intimidating. There was a lot of characters going on, which I guess makes sense because, you know, DC's been around a lot longer. They've rebooted their continuity a couple times and stuff. You got way more characters, so it's always a lot to process, but I've always liked DC. It's not like I haven't been a DC fan. As a matter of fact, Superman, even though I was a Marvel guy, Superman was always my favorite character of all time. Still my favorite comic book character of all time. He's great, but I've never really been into DC like that, but I have been following them. Like, my first DC comic I ever read was The Death of Superman, which was, I believe, Superman number 75. You know, he's fighting Doomsday, crazy stuff, you know, so that was good. And obviously I went back to read some of the classic stuff, right? Crisis on Infinite Earths, Batman The Dark Knight Returns, which was insane, Kingdom Come Hushed Batman, which was really good, All-Star Superman. I liked a lot of DC stuff, but again, I've always been a Marvel guy, right? And again, just going back to what I said, main reason for that is the storylines were just too unwieldy. I remember for many years, I really wanted DC to actually like go back to what they did with Crisis on Infinite Earths. Like, okay, just reboot everything. Let me just get a nice clean jumping point. And we kind of were promised that with the New 52. It was supposed to be a clean start for the universe, which I thought was great. I'm like, hey, listen, if they do it the way Crisis did, that's going to be great. Because what did Crisis give us? They gave us Superman, Man of Steel, Wonder Woman, Batman, Wally West, my man Kyle Rayner. Like, there was a lot of good stuff that came out of Crisis on Infinite Earths. I was hoping New 52 would follow in those footsteps. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. New 52. New 52, as I learned in later years, was kind of put together at the last minute because apparently Warner Brothers, who owns DC, was on the verge of actually selling the company off. So they were like, okay, get Flashpoint out there and just start New 52. As a matter of fact, New 52 actually started in the middle of Flashpoint, which is crazy, right? So they rebooted the whole universe, but they didn't do it the way Crisis did. Basically, like Superman, right? He got a complete reboot. Wonder Woman kind of got a complete reboot, but then you had characters like Batman and Green Lantern, which didn't really get rebooted at all because both of those books were the best-selling books from DC right before New 52 came around, so they didn't want to just clean house. So it was just a very sloppily done reboot, and like I said, as I learned later, basically they actually did only have like a couple months to put the whole thing together, so there was just craziness going around. So I stuck with the New 52 for the first year and a half, right? The first arc of each storyline, right? And I stuck with Superman and stuff. I kept going down, but for the most part, I kind of dropped New 52. The shining glory of New 52, obviously, is the Greg Capullo, Zack Snyder run on Batman, which is fantastic. I'm actually reading that now. Back then, I read Court of Owls, but that was it. But now I'm going back to reading all the other stuff. It's like, wow, this is great. I understand why it's so highly praised. But yeah, New 52 did not come off very well. And one of the things that people didn't like about New 52 was the fact that all that history that DC had accumulated over the decades was gone. It was jettisoned. All the relationships, all that other stuff was just gone. People were like, oh man, I don't like this stuff. So sales started tanking for New 52, and then they did the whole thing. It's like, all right, we got to do Rebirth. And they got the man, the myth, the legend himself, Jeff Johns, to do it. You know, Jeff Johns, he's done a lot of great stuff, but you know, what his biggest claim to fame was Green Lantern Rebirth, right? So they were like, okay, let's do that, but for the whole universe. And that issue, number one, DC Rebirth number one, amazing. One of the greatest comics I've ever read. It was just so good, and it reminded you of why you love comic books. It is all about the characters, you know, their stories, their interpersonal relationships and all that. Had a lot of that in there. And again, I'm saying this as a guy who's not been a traditional DC guy like that. I was like really moved by some of this stuff. It was great. And what was interesting about that was at around the same time, not exactly the same time, Marvel started a little bit earlier, but around this time their DC did Rebirth, Marvel was doing all new, all different Marvel, right? Which was not good, you know. And around, okay, just my personal story. So Rebirth started at the end, it was May or so, May of 2016. And around that time, I had gotten Marvel Comics Unlimited, the app So I started reading all the stuff from, all new Marvel onward, right? And I'm comparing that to DC Rebirth. I'm like, oh yeah, this is a huge difference, which is crazy to me because I'm like, wait, DC's doing better stuff than Marvel. This is completely insane. But they were just telling kick-ass comic book stories, which Marvel didn't really seem to be doing with all new. I'm not going to get into that, but yeah, man, like the Rebirth was just fantastic. And I picked up every book, just checking them all out. And every one of them, okay, not everyone, but most of them blew me away, right? It got to a point where I only dropped a handful of books, right? Not because the books were bad, it's just like they weren't exactly my thing, right? But that lets you know, it's like with Marvel, I stopped reading some of these books like after an issue or two because they were just bad, I didn't do that with Rebirth. Like, okay, I was just like, hey, this thing's not my deal, but good stuff that was going on there. Really like imaginative. I especially liked Action Comics, Detective Comics, Superman, Batman, obviously. Wonder Woman was kind of all right. It was Greg Rucka that was doing it. I wasn't really feeling that, but the current run, Robinson's doing it, brilliant, right? But it's just a lot of really good stuff. And what works about all these stories is, because it was Jeff Johns, I was pretty much telling all the creative teams, like, okay, this is what works about these characters. Focus on characters, man, like the love, the hope, the brightness. That's what DC's always been at. Like DC, if you compare it to the Marvel universe, it's always been a lighter universe, right? Don't get me wrong, there's been heavy stuff that happened, all that, but it was always a lighter tone. Like if you go back and you read JLA versus Avengers, they even mention that in the actual story, right? The characters like, hey, people actually like heroes on this earth. The Marvel characters were saying that, like, people actually like heroes on this earth. They hate us on our earth. So yeah, DC's always had that about him. Even back during like the Silver Age, it was like that Marvel was a little bit heavier stories. DC was more lighthearted. So yeah, they brought back some of that back into it, but it still had that gravitas to it, which is great. So I do want to talk about some of the new things they were doing with DC Rebirth, because again, I mentioned some of the older books I liked, but there's other new stuff which I really enjoyed. I enjoyed Green Lanterns. This has Jessica Cruz and Simon Baz as the Lanterns of Sector 2814. What was cool is like the first part of it was written by Sam Humphries, I believe, and he focused more on the Earth stuff, and now they got Tim Seeley on, and now these two lanterns are out in space. Great stories. Another one, this was a surprise to me, new Superman, new super hyphen man, the Chinese Superman, right? On the face of it, like, this is stupid, a Chinese Superman, this is dumb. No, dude, this is really good. I love how, I don't have the writer's name off the top of my head, but I love how he mixes like mythological Chinese stuff into the Superman mythos. It's great. Like, again, like new Superman is probably like the biggest surprise book out of all these. I'm still reading them. They're still good. Yeah, and I'm gonna make a whole video about this eventually, but I'm gonna drop the little seed now. DC knows how to do good diversity. None of these diversity things that they do, quote unquote diversity things, are forced. You know why? Because all the characters are not just, they're like, hey, look at me, I'm Chinese, I'm black, you should like me now. No, it's like they're an actual character first who just so happens to be a different ethnicity. It's brilliant. But again, I'll do that another time. So another thing that I really liked about DC Rebirth is the mini events. Right now, let's just be honest here. With Marvel, they tired everybody out with like these mega events. Not even every year. Like you would have 2 or 3 or 4 of them in 1 year. It's like, yo, I need some breathing room here, son. So what I liked about DC Rebirth is till this day, no mega events. They've had a bunch of mini events. And I think that's how you do it, because you don't tire people out. And then I probably should have mentioned this earlier. The cool thing about these books is a lot of them come out every other week, right? Like let's say, this week is Superman, right? You don't have to wait a month. You just wait, like not the next week, but the week after that, right? So because of that, they've been able to like finish off these mini events in like a month. If you have like a 4-part mini event, you're done with it in a month. It's fantastic. And I also should have mentioned that I like the fact that DC Rebirth, and this is something Marvel needs to do, they cut the fat. They came back with 42 books, the best-selling ones. I believe 26 of them were bi-monthly or whatever, and then the others were monthly, which is good. It's like you keep the higher selling books coming out every other week, and then the middle to lower selling books, they come out every month, right? Very good. But yeah, so because their scheduling, they're able to have more of these mini like events, but without tiring people. Some of my favorite events that they've had are Superman Reborn, where you basically had the new 52 Superman and I'm gonna call him the John Byrne Superman merged into one. You had Batman Night of the Monster Man, which I believe was the first mini event of DC Rebirth. That was really cool. It's basically the Batman family in Gotham fighting off giant monsters. It's crazy. You had the Button, which was Flash and Batman, and the whole thing with the Watchmen, which I'm gonna get to in a little bit. That That was really good. Super Sons of Tomorrow, that's a lot of fun. You have the future versions of the Justice League, basically, where they're the kids of the modern Justice League. That was good. And then, and this was kind of like timed for the movie, Justice League versus Suicide Squad. That was a lot of fun. So a lot of really great events that keep you going. And like I said earlier, I did drop a couple of titles. And again, none of these books are bad per se. They just weren't exactly up my alley. So I dropped Batgirl and Birds of Prey, Cyborg, Superwoman, Batman Beyond, and Hellblazer. The thing is, with a couple of these, especially Batman Beyond, I'm going to just go back and pick up the trades, because there was some kind of interesting stuff, but not enough to warrant me picking them up every time. But again, all these titles were pretty good. They're good if you're into that sort of stuff, But for me, it wasn't all that. But now we do need to talk about Doomsday Clock, right? We need to talk about Doomsday Clock real quick. I could probably do a whole video on that, but I'll keep it short, because the whole premise of Rebirth is basically Dr. Manhattan from the Watchmen. He is responsible for taking away all the hope and love and whatever of the New 52. He's responsible for taking all that away from the DC universe when it all came back as the New 52, right? How brilliant is that? Like, I know it sounds stupid. It's like Watchmen and DC, that's dumb, but it's actually kind of genius, right? Because think about it like this. In the real world, Watchmen, the comic, changed all the comics. After that, comics became darker, more cynical, right? And obviously the DC universe, even though it was lighter compared to Marvel, it did become darker and more cynical too. But then within the story, it works too, because literally Dr. Manhattan was the one that took out all the hope and love out of the DC universe in the story. So Watchmen did it in the real world, and Dr. Manhattan did it in the comics. Brilliant stuff, right? So Doomsday Clock, that's going on right now. That's Jeff Johns, the Master, back at it. Gary Frank doing brilliant work there, right? And you also have Metal, which is going on. Dark Knight's Metal. That's Zack Snyder and Greg Capullo back again doing kick-ass Batman stuff. And again, this is another one of those concepts that shouldn't work. The whole premise of the story is evil versions of Batman that are also the Justice League are invading our reality. That's stupid, but it works somehow. It's brilliant, right? And then a couple of surprises, which to me came out of nowhere. You had Batman White Knight, which is a kind of Elseworld story about what would happen if the Joker, or Jack Napier in this case, what if you took his insanity away, but he's still as smart as he always was, right? It's really good stuff that's going on in that book. And this was a huge surprise. Batman Creature of the Night. This is Kurt Busiek. He's writing this. I haven't read anything from Kurt Busiek in years, right? The Master right there. He did Marvels. He did my favorite run on Avengers Assemble. Great stuff. So this is cool because it supposedly takes place in the real world. And you had this kid called Bruce Wainwright whose parents are murdered, and he's a big fan of Batman. He kind of sees himself as Bruce Wayne, but then he gets visited by this crazy bat creature that he could kind of control. But yeah, it's nuts, man. And also I want to give a quick shout out to Bane Conquest. That's really a lot of fun. That, like, if you love old school Batman stuff, like, yeah, this is the thing for you. Like those 90s books, you got to check that out, man. It's great, man. DC, there's just so much fun going on right now, and the future looks bright. I believe starting in February, they're going to launch the new Age of Heroes, where they're going to introduce new characters. Very exciting stuff. And what's cool about that initiative is it's very much focused on artists, right? Because if you guys remember comics from back in the day, you bought comics because of the art, right? Nowadays, you buy them because of the writer, and obviously you need a writer because you read comics for stories, right? But I miss the days where there was an emphasis on art. I'm glad they're bringing that back, man. That is really good. And also, I do need to mention this, Brian Michael Bendis, who's been around at Marvel for ages, he's at DC now. How crazy is that, man? And Bendis, he does big stories, so I expect him to get fully integrated within whatever DC's doing, So, whew, man, it's gonna be nuts, man. So, yeah, man, DC, I'm just gonna say this. If you ain't into DC, you need to get into DC, because DC is the best of the big two right now. Marvel, they're giving me signs that they're coming back. Check out the previous video for that. But right now, it's like, yeah, Marvel is coming back. DC's been murdering it already, So, yeah, man, if you're a comic book head, especially superheroes, you need to check out some DC, man. It's fantastic. All right, so that's gonna do it for this video, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun to do this one, because again, the reason I want to do this channel is because I want to talk about the things I love, right? And I love DC Comics, and it's just crazy to me that I'd be saying this, and I can't even be like, oh, if you were to go back to younger Tony and tell him this, he wouldn't believe you. No, if you were to go back to Tony from 3 years ago, he wouldn't believe you, right? But DC, thank you, man. You're giving us so much great content. I love it, man. So yes, that's it for this video. I want to thank you guys for watching it, and if you liked it, I would appreciate a thumbs up. That'd be fantastic. And also, please comment, what are your favorite DC books? What are you reading? What do you plan to read? And what are you looking forward to the company doing in the future? Please sound off. off, man. I want to hear your comments. So that's going to do it for me. Once again, I was Tony, and I'll see you around, man. Later.